So, I was reading some Robert Frost the other night. He has these incredible lines in Acquainted with the Night. It goes like this. I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. Man, what a mood, right? You can almost feel the damp cold. Frost is a master at painting this very personal, isolated kind of sadness. But what's fascinating is how he does it. It's always anchored on the self. I have walked, I am sad. The loneliness works because it's me against the night. We stand outside of nature, looking in. But in a video about a Chinese poem, why am I talking about Robert Frost? Because I want you to appreciate a completely different relationship with nature. In Chinese poetry, true sadness isn't about watching the night. It's about dissolving into it. It's what we call Yi Jing, the ultimate artistic mood. How do you create that mood? 1,200 years ago, a failed scholar wrote just 28 characters. He didn't use the word I. Because he was so sad, his ego simply collapsed. He merges himself into the cold maples and the flickering fire. It's a masterpiece of Wang Wu, losing the self. Today we are looking at Night Mooring at Maple Bridge by Zhang Ji. And we are going to see how 28 characters created a trap for every sleepless soul. Listen to this. 月落乌啼霜满天，江枫渔火对抽面，古苏城外寒山寺，夜班钟声到客串。Alright, so here is the first line, 月落乌啼霜满天. Before we analyze it, just close your eyes and feel the scene. The moon has sunk, plunging the world into absolute darkness. A crow's harsh cry pierces the dead silence, and a bone-chilling frost feels like it's suffocating the entire sky. It is the ultimate picture of a freezing, desperate autumn night. But notice how Zhang Ji writes it. If we translate it literally, it sounds like this. Moonfall, crow cry, frost full sky. There are no tenses, no connecting words. He just smashes 3 freezing images together. You know that classic marketing story about putting beer next to diapers? 2 totally unrelated items, but put them together, and they create a weirdly perfect psychological connection. Chinese poets do exactly that. Moon, crow, frost, bam. They create a cinematic montage suspended completely outside of time. If you try to paint this tenseless void, you get traditional Eastern ink wash, just a quiet, boundless emptiness. But then the poet's eyes drop to the river. Line 2, Jiang Feng, Yu Huo, Dui Chou Mian, river maples, and fishing lanterns. Look at the sheer poetic contrast here. On one side, massive, ancient, freezing maples. On the other, a tiny, fragile, warm fishing lantern. They are forced together to keep watch over a sleepless night. And just like that, a classic atmospheric Eastern ink wash painting is formed. It actually looks pretty romantic. I feel like I could stare at it all day, ha. But a standard English translation usually goes, river maples and fishing lanterns gaze upon my sorrowful sleep. Wait a minute, my? What do you mean my? Zhang Ji never said I or my. English grammar forces you to have an ego. But remember, Zhang Ji is a failed scholar. He just lost everything under the weight of this cosmic coldness. His ego simply collapses. He doesn't just look at the landscape. He dissolves into it. This is the Eastern Yi Jing of losing the self. The sorrow transfers to the environment. It is the trees and the fire that are feeling the pain. So, what happens to the visual when the ego disappears? Suddenly, I had a thought. What kind of artistic mood would we get if we blended a heavy, Western deep blue into this ancient poem? Would it feel like Yves Klein using the most absolute pure blue to give this loneliness a physical form? A blue with no impurities, no borders, quiet yet heavy. It feels like the endless dark streets in Hopper's paintings, and it feels like the unspeakable silence hidden deep inside all of us. Looking at this blue-swallowed scene, there's this intense feeling of déjà vu. It instantly reminds me of Hopper's masterpiece, Nighthawks. In those late-night city lights, people sit side by side, yet they are worlds apart. He captures the silent, empty isolation of modern civilization. Think about it. One is at an ancient eastern river crossing. The other is at a western street corner. Different eras, different scenes. But that specific midnight loneliness is exactly the same. When Klein's Pure Blue meets Nighthawks and meets Zhang Ji's ancient poem, Eastern poetic sorrow and Western modern isolation finally merge into this one single stroke of color. It turns out loneliness doesn't care about ancient or modern, east or west. It is just a quiet, expansive blue, and in this ocean of blue, that tiny, isolated fishing lantern is Hopper's lonely diner. But then, I generated this image. Whether it's the black and white of traditional ink or the deep blue of Hopper, they both hide an unspeakable loneliness in their empty spaces. They wrap an unmelting sorrow in their shades. But what if we use more realistic, vibrant colors to describe it? Instead of using ink to hide the emotion, what if we lay down the silvery moonlight, the cyan night sky, the warm yellow fishing fire, and the orange-red maples, stroke by stroke using light and shadow? Suddenly it becomes incredibly romantic and real. It feels like we are literally standing by that river on that autumn night, 1,200 years ago. There's a gentle warmth hidden in this freezing night. Looking at this, it feels like sorrow and frustration can actually become romantic, and that romance belongs to the poet and to us. Who says sorrow only has to look sad? From another perspective, sorrow is just a different kind of beauty, a romance hidden in the details. There is a famous modern Chinese poem that goes, "As you stand on the bridge looking at the view, the person looking at the view from the tower looks at you." Perhaps as we stare at this freezing night from a millennium ago, we are also the landscape in Zhang Ji's eyes. Perhaps we are that gentle touch of human warmth he accidentally glimpsed on that autumn night. That being said, we should probably establish how a standard translator tackles the end of this poem. So here are the final two lines. Gusu Town, Wai Han Shan Si, Ye Ban Chong Sheng Dao Ke Chuan. A typical, well-meaning English translation usually looks something like this. Beyond the Gusu city wall lies Hanshan Temple. At midnight I hear the bell from my passenger boat. Alright, so here we go. Notice something wrong. That's right, the translator made it woke. They added pronouns. What do you mean I, huh? Translator, huh? Zhang Ji didn't say I. Okay, I'm joking. But normally in English you need an explicit subject doing the action. You need someone to hear the bell. But Zhang Ji uses the verb dao, to arrive, or to reach. The subject of the sentence isn't a person. It's the sound itself. The sound of the bell travels through the freezing night and physically strikes the boat. But think about the brilliant shift happening here. In the first two lines, Zhang Ji takes his deep sorrow and frustration and completely dissolves it into the outside world, into the nature and the scenery. But these last two lines, it's a sudden shift to his inner world. Are the temple and the midnight bell even real, or are they just an illusion created by a frustrated, sleepless mind? We have absolutely no idea. But the psychological effect is visceral. Just when his sorrow seemed to have disappeared into the void, bong, the bell rings, and that invisible sound wave literally drags the heavy sorrow right back into the passenger boat. He is wide awake. Reading this, it feels like I am instantly transported back to that freezing midnight over 1,200 years ago, sitting right next to this deeply frustrated man. And when that bell finally strikes the boat, man, it just triggers this entire visual montage in my head. We go from the traditional Chinese ink wash to that melancholic deep blue, and finally to these vibrant impressionist watercolors. Think about it. Through these visuals, we went from dissolving into nature to being completely isolated from it, and finally transcending it all together. We are seeing entirely different Yijings, different artistic moods all layered onto this one single poem. Did the bell bring a burst of warm connection, or just a fragmented hallucination? The poem doesn't say. Zhang Ji just stops at the sound. He never gives us an answer, because in the end, the person reading the poem, the one visualizing the night, is the true artist. And so, while I understand why translators add "I hear" for clarity, I like to try my hand at a murkier translation. Here's Night Mooring at Maple Bridge, as translated by me, outside Gusu City, cold mountain temple. Midnight bell sound reaches passenger boat. If we take the time to parse the raw mechanics of the language and let our own imaginations fill in the blanks, we can get just a little bit closer to that freezing boat. A canvas has its borders, but history is real. Behind these 28 characters, there's no poetry god. There's just a regular guy, sitting alone in a freezing autumn night, facing his own failures. Actually, Zhang Ji and us, we are a two-way scenery. 1,000 years ago, he hid his heavy heart inside the maples and the midnight bell. Today, we read his poem and project our own emotions right back into his night. Like that famous modern Chinese poem says, "As you stand on the bridge, looking at the view, the person looking at the view from the tower looks at you." We are gazing at him in this painting. But across a millennium, maybe we are also that gentle touch of human warmth he accidentally glimpsed. Next, let's just close our eyes and let Zhang Ji tell the story himself.
My name is Zhang Ji. History books didn't even bother to write my biography. People can only piece together my blurred shadow from the fragments of others. So, please don't try to translate my poem word for word. I only hope you can see that night. It was an era when the great Tang dynasty fell from glory into the abyss. I passed the exams, yet remained a wandering, jobless scholar. Then, the war broke out. The capital fell. I was forced to flee on a small boat, drifting endlessly to the south. On one desolate autumn night, I moored my boat beneath Maple Bridge. The moon set, the crows cried, and frost filled the sky. Seeing my country in ruins, and my own life as a wandering failure, the overwhelming sorrow kept me awake all night. Right at that moment, the midnight bell from Hanshan Temple drifted slowly to my boat. I picked up my brush in the dark and wrote down those 28 characters. I never thought this little poem would survive. The Tang dynasty had too many brilliant poets. I was just a speck of dust. I eventually got a minor official job to help the people, but soon died in poverty, unable to even afford a proper funeral. I was almost swallowed completely by the flood of history. But how lucky I am to have condensed the indescribable feelings of millions into those 28 characters. Dynasties have changed. The bell at Hanshan Temple has been replaced again and again. But as long as this poem exists, you can always hear that bell, striking the hearts of the lost and broken 1,000 years ago. Some people only need to write one good poem in their lifetime. I, Zhang Ji, traded one night of sorrow for 1,000 years of echoes. This is Jiangnan, and this is my Maple Bridge.